Hello, welcome to the Advaita channel. I'm going to be reading from The Transparency of Things by Rupert Spira. Sadhguru Mujiji Ki Jai. Om Sadhguru Anantaji Ki Jai. Sangaji Ki Jai. Welcome to anyone joining from YouTube. Hello, Danan. Hello, Pekka. Namaste. Lovely to have you today with me. I know you're a little bit delayed behind, so but lovely to have you nevertheless. Very happy to be reading, actually. Very happy to be reading. It's such a beautiful, beautiful word, taking us deeper into this experience, direct experience of being. Because it's so clear, there isn't really any need for me to elaborate too much. Only if it's a natural expression, really, of what comes from the heart. So I shall start. I shall begin. The mind has built a powerful edifice of concepts about reality that bears little relation to actual experience, and as a result, consciousness has veiled itself from itself. These concepts are built out of mind, and therefore their deconstruction is one of the ways through which consciousness comes to recognize itself again, that is, to know itself again. Consciousness is, in fact, always knowing itself. However, through this deconstruction of concepts, consciousness comes to recognize itself not through the reflected veil of apparent objects, but knowingly and directly. Concepts are not destroyed in this process. They are still available for use when needed. In the contemplations that this book comprises, it is acknowledged that the purpose of reasoning is not to frame or apprehend reality. However, it is also acknowledged that the mind has constructed complex and persuasive ideas that have posited an image of ourselves and of the world that is very far from the facts of our experience. These ideas have convinced us that there is a world that exists separate from and in. These ideas have convinced us that there is a world that exists separate from and independent of consciousness. They have persuaded us to believe that I, the consciousness that is seeing these words, is an entity that resides inside the body, that it was born and will die, and that it is the subject of experience, whilst everything else, the world, other, is the object. Although this is never our actual experience, the mind is so persuasive and convincing that we have duped ourselves into believing that we actually experience these two elements, that we experience the world separate and apart from ourselves, and that we experience our own self as a separate and independent consciousness. In the disinterested contemplation of our experience, we measure the facts of experience itself against these beliefs. The falsity of the ideas that the mind entertains about the nature of reality, about the nature of experience, is exposed in this disinterested contemplation. All spiritual traditions acknowledge that reality cannot be apprehended with the mind. As a result of this understanding, some teachings have denied the use of the mind as a valid tool of inquiry or exploration. It is true that consciousness is beyond the mind and cannot therefore be framed within its abstract concepts. However, this does not invalidate the use of the mind to explore the nature of consciousness and reality. Ignorance is composed of beliefs, and belief is already an activity of mind. If we deny the validity of mind, why use it in the first place to harbour beliefs? By reading these words, we are, consciously or unconsciously, agreeing to accept the validity and, by the same token, the limitations of the mind. We are giving the mind credibility in spite of its limitations. We are acknowledging its ability to play a part in drawing attention to that which is beyond itself or outside the sphere of its knowledge. It would be disingenuous to use the mind to deny its own validity. Our very use of the mind asserts its validity. However, it is a different matter to use the mind to understand its own limits. It may well be that at the end of a process of exploring the nature of experience, using the full capacity of its powers of conceptual thinking, the mind will come to understand the limits of its ability to apprehend the truth of the matter, and as a result will spontaneously come to an end. It will collapse from within, so to speak. However, this is a very different situation from one in which the mind has been denied any provisional credibility on the basis that nothing it says about reality can ultimately be true. As a result of the exposure of beliefs and feelings that derive from preconceived, unsubstantiated notions of reality, a new invitation opens up. Another possibility is revealed. This possibility cannot be apprehended by the mind because it is beyond the mind. However, the obstacles to this new possibility are revealed and dissolved in this investigation. They are dissolved by our openness to the possibility that in this moment we actually experience only one thing. That experience is not divided into I and other, subject and object, me and the world, consciousness and existence. We are open to the possibility that there is only one single, seamless totality, that consciousness and existence are one, that there is only one reality. The edifice of dualistic ideas, which seems to be validated by experience, is well constructed with beliefs at the level of the mind and feelings at the level of the body, which are tightly interwoven, mutually substantiating and validating one another. In the disinterested contemplation of these ideas and feelings, their falsity is unravelled. We see clearly that our ideas do not correspond to our experience. This paves the way for experience to reveal itself to us as it truly is, as in fact it always is, free from the ignorance of dualistic thinking. We begin to experience ourselves and the world as they truly are. Our experience itself does not change, but we feel that it changes. Reality remains as it always is, for it is what it is, independent of the ideas we entertain about it. However, our interpretation changes, and this new interpretation becomes the cornerstone of a new possibility. This new possibility comes from an unknown direction. It does not come as an object, a thought, or a feeling. It is unveiled, in most cases, as a series of revelations, each dismantling part of the previous edifice of dualistic thinking. And the unfolding of this revelation, in turn, has a profound impact on the appearance of the mind, the body, and the world. Consciousness veils itself from itself by pretending to limit itself to a separate entity and then forgets that it is pretending. As a corollary to this self-limitation, Consciousness projects all that is not this separate self outside of itself. This projection is what we call the world, and thus the separation between I and the world is born. In reality, this separation has never taken place. If we look for it, we can never actually find it. Ignorance is an illusion. It is an illusion that is wrought through the conceptual powers of the mind, through erroneous beliefs. These beliefs are created and maintained through a process of deluded thinking. That is, by thinking that bears no relation to actual experience. The dissolution of these beliefs is accomplished by exploring and exposing them, using direct experience as the guiding reference. Nothing new is created by this process of exploration. Its purpose is not enlightenment or self-realization. It is simply to see clearly what is. Our beliefs are the root cause of psychological suffering, and they are dismantled by a process of contemplative investigation. What we normally consider to be a line of investigation begins with assumptions that are considered to be implicitly true. In this contemplation, we start with the same assumptions, but we measure them against the truth of our experience. We do not build on them, we deconstruct them. This line of reasoning leads to understanding. However, understanding does not take place in the mind. It is beyond the mind. It is a moment when consciousness experiences itself directly and knowingly. Understanding is not created by a process in the mind any more than blue sky is created by clearing in the clouds. Understanding is not created by a process in the mind any more than blue sky is created by a clearing in the clouds. However, it may be revealed by it. Understanding is often preceded by a line of inquiry and can subsequently be formulated by the mind. Such a formulation, which comes from understanding and not from concepts, has the power to take us to the experience of reality. Such a formulation, which comes from understanding and not from concepts, has the power to take us to the experience of reality. I guess for me, that something that comes strongly is that you can have this experience of reality from beyond the mind, but then use formulations and concepts to express it. That really comes through quite strongly there. Through its reasoning powers, the mind is brought to its own limit, and as a result, the edifice of mind collapses. This is the experience of understanding, the timeless moment in which consciousness is revealed to itself. Consciousness perceives itself. It knows itself knowingly. Everything falls into place. I, this consciousness that is seeing these words and experiencing whatever it is that is being experienced in this moment, is not located inside a mind. The mind is not located inside a body, and the body is not located inside a world. The body is simply the sensation of the body, and the world is simply the perception of the world. Take away sensing and perceiving from the experience of the body and the world, and what objective qualities are left of them? None. Sensations and perceptions are made out of mind. That is, they are made out of sensing and perceiving. There is no other substance to them other than sensing and perceiving. If there was another substance, independent of sensing and perceiving, that constituted the body and the world, that substance would remain after sensing and perceiving had been withdrawn. However, nothing objective remains of the experience of the body and the world when sensing and perceiving have been withdrawn. And if we look clearly at the substance of mind, the substance of perceiving and sensing, we find that it is none other than consciousness in which it appears. If there were another substance apart from consciousness that constituted the mind, then that substance would remain after consciousness had been withdrawn from the experience of the mind. However, when consciousness is withdrawn from the mind vanishes absolutely, leaving only consciousness. The mind The body and the world are located inside consciousness, and they are made only out of consciousness. That is our experience. This is not a new experience that is arrived at through inquiry or meditation. It has always been our experience. We just may not have noticed it. In meditation, we simply notice that this is always already the case. Very powerful. The mind, the body, and the world are located inside consciousness, and they are made only out of consciousness. That is our experience. This is not a new experience that is arrived at through inquiry or meditation. It has always been our experience. We just may not have noticed it. In meditation, we simply notice that this is always already the case. If we try to perceive this perceiving consciousness as an object, we find that it is impossible. Take the analogy of consciousness as space, and imagine that this space, like consciousness, is conscious, aware that it has the capacity to see, to perceive, to experience, that it is an experiencing space. So take the analogy of consciousness as space. Imagine that this space, like consciousness, is conscious, aware that it has the capacity to see, to perceive, to experience, that it is an experiencing space. Now imagine what this space would perceive if it were to look for itself, if it were to look at itself. It would not see anything objective, because space cannot be perceived. It is empty, transparent, colourless and invisible. This perceiving space is too close to itself to be able to see itself. The space that is being looked for is the space that is looking. The space that is being looked for is the space that is looking. So it reminds me so strongly of Muji speaking of Francis of Assisi and saying, what you are looking for is where you're looking from. Only an object can be perceived objectively. So this perceiving space would see only the objects that are present within it, but not the space itself. However, we have said that this space is, like consciousness, endowed with the capacity to experience, that it is an experiencing space. So to look for itself is unnecessary because it is, by definition, already perceiving itself. It is already experiencing itself because that is what it is. Its nature is experiencing. Its being itself is the knowing or experience of itself. Its being itself is the knowing or experiencing of itself. However, the experience of experiencing itself is colourless, transparent, and invisible. It has no objective qualities. There is nothing that is being objectively experienced. And because this conscious space is accustomed to experiencing objects, it construes this non-objective experience of itself, this colourless, transparent, invisible experience, as a non-experience. It thinks that itself, this conscious space, is not present. At this point, there are three options for this space. One is to search for itself as an objective experience, not understanding that it is already experiencing itself and cannot therefore ever find itself anywhere else. The second is to identify itself with some of the objects that are present and therefore satisfy the sense of identity that is inherent within itself. In this way, it mixes up its own identity with an object. The third is to see clearly that it is already only experiencing itself and always has been. Whatever is seen or perceived is an object of the mind, body, or world. Whatever is perceived is not this perceiving consciousness. It is an object that is appearing to it, within it. If consciousness cannot be perceived as an object, how do we know that it has a limit? If consciousness cannot be perceived as an object, how do we know that it has a limit? Do we experience a limit to this perceiving consciousness? It is impossible to experience a limit to consciousness, because such a limit would, by definition, have some objective quality. Such an apparent limit would have to be an object and, like all objects, would itself appear within consciousness. Consciousness would be aware of it, but would not be defined by it. In fact, an object that appears within consciousness tells us nothing about consciousness other than that it is present and aware, that it is, just as a chair tells us that the space in which it appears is present. Therefore, we have no actual experience of a limit to consciousness. And if there is no experiential evidence to suggest that consciousness is limited, on what grounds do we believe that it is personal? Why do we think that we, consciousness, are a personal entity inside the body? Thoughts are limited. Bodies are limited. The world is limited. However, there is no experiential evidence to validate the belief that consciousness, in which the mind, the body, and the world appear, is limited or personal. If we claim that consciousness has a limit, there must, by definition, be an experience of that limit, and therefore of that which exists outside that limit, of something that borders consciousness. So again, if we claim that consciousness has a limit, there must, by definition, be an experience of that limit, and therefore of that which exists outside that limit, of something that borders consciousness. However, how could we have an experience of such an object if that object were itself outside the limit of consciousness? How could we be conscious of something beyond consciousness? Consciousness is required for every experience, and therefore, by definition, it is not possible to experience something outside consciousness. And if we do not experience such an object, how can we say that anything exists outside consciousness? We have no experience of the existence of anything outside consciousness, and therefore we have no experience of a limited or personal consciousness. Consciousness is transparent, colourless, self-luminous. self-experiencing, self-knowing, self-evident. That is our experience in this moment. Consciousness is known as omnipresence because there is nowhere where consciousness is not. Consciousness is known as omnipresence because there is nowhere where consciousness is not. It is not that consciousness is everywhere, it is that everywhere is in consciousness. Consciousness is known as omniscience because whatever is known by and through consciousness. It knows all that is known. It is known as omnipotence because whatever appears depends solely on consciousness for its existence. Whatever appears, emerges out of, is sustained by, and is dissolved into consciousness. Consciousness creates everything out of its own being. Thank you for joining me on the Advaita channel, operated by the Sangha of Being. It's been beautiful sharing in this. allowing these words to take us deeper into that direct experience of consciousness without any limits, dismantling those assumptions that create this sense of duality. Thank you, Danan. Thank you, Pekka. And anybody else that may watch this, I hope it can go some way to taking you deeper into your own sense of inherent freedom.